So we're back and ready to unpack how Austria manages this delicate dance between being a sovereign nation and a member of the EU.
It's interesting because when I think about the EU, I sometimes picture this like huge bureaucratic machine in Brussels, just making rules for everybody.
It's easy to get that impression, but the reality is a lot more nuanced, thankfully.
Okay, good.
The EU doesn't have this unlimited power to dictate everything.
Right.
They operate on what's called the principle of limited individual authorization.
Limited individual authorization.
It's a mouthful, but it basically means that the EU can only exercise the powers that member states specifically agree to give them.
So it's more like a club where the members, they set the rules.
That's a good way to think about it.
And Austria has a say in those rules, right?
Absolutely. And any changes to those rules, those require changes to the EU treaties, which means every single member state has to agree.
Wow, so Austria still has a lot of control.
They do. It's not just about following orders from Brussels.
That's reassuring to know. But how does Austria make sure that their voice is actually heard in all of this? I mean, Brussels is pretty far from Vienna.
Well, Austria has active participation in all of the EU institutions, especially in something called the Council of the European Union.
The Council of the European Union.
This council, it's kind of like the main decision-making body of the EU.
Okay.
And this is where Austria gets to have its say.
So it's like having a seat at the big table where all the important decisions are being made.
Exactly. Austrian ministers, they represent the country's interests in this council.
So they're the ones who are in there, fighting for Austria's position.
Exactly. And this is where things get really fascinating.
Okay, I'm listening.
Depending on what policy they're talking about, the Austrian representative might actually be a federal minister or a representative from one of the Bundesländer.
Wait, so someone from, like, Tyrol could be the one speaking for Austria on a specific issue.
Absolutely. They have that kind of flexibility.
That's so interesting. I mean, it seems like this recognizes that expertise can come from different levels of government.
It does. It's a way to make sure that regional interests are also represented within this big EU framework.
Makes sense. But what about accountability? Let's say an Austrian minister makes a decision in the EU Council. Who are they accountable to back home?
That's a great question, and it's one that the Austrian constitution actually addresses very specifically.
Okay, how so?
It states that Austrian representatives in the EU, they're legally accountable for their actions,
Okay.
both to the federal government and to the Bundesländer.
So they can't just go off and do their own thing without thinking about the consequences.
Not at all. They have to answer for their decisions.
And how does that accountability work in practice?
Well, it depends on the issue.
Okay.
If it's something that's under federal competence, like foreign policy, then the National Council would hold the minister accountable. But if it's an area where the Bundesländer normally have power, like education or healthcare, then all the state parliaments have to issue a joint resolution to hold the minister accountable.
Oh, so it's a bit more complex in those cases.
It is, but it's a way to ensure that both national and regional interests are protected.
It's like they've thought of everything.
They've tried to.
It's really impressive. So we've got this balance between national and regional interests, even within the EU.
Precisely. It shows the challenges and opportunities that come with being part of this huge supranational organization.
This whole idea of balance seems to come up again and again when we talk about Austrian constitutional law.
You're right. It's a recurring theme.
We saw it with the federal structure, and now we see it again with the EU membership.
It's all about finding ways to distribute power, preventing any one entity from becoming too dominant.
It's like a carefully choreographed dance.
I like that analogy.
Everyone moving together, but also having their own individual steps.
Exactly. And speaking of carefully choreographed dances, let's talk about the separation of powers.
Ah, yes. The classic 3 branches of government.
Right. The legislative, the executive, and the judicial.
Each with their own distinct role and all designed to limit each other's power.
Precisely. This separation of powers, it's a fundamental principle of any democracy.
So just to recap, in Austria, the parliament makes the laws. The government, led by the chancellor, carries out those laws.
Yeah, right.
And the courts, they interpret the laws and make sure they're applied fairly.
Exactly. And they each have ways to check the other branches, making sure no one gets too powerful.
But how do you guarantee that the courts are truly independent? Because judges are appointed by politicians, right?
That's true, but the Austrian system takes judicial independence very seriously. The Constitution has specific provisions to safeguard that independence.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, judges are appointed for life.
For life.
Well, Well, or until they reach the mandatory retirement age, but it's a long time.
So they're not worried about losing their jobs if they make a decision that someone in power doesn't like.
Exactly. They can't be easily removed from office except for very serious misconduct.
That makes sense.
And their salaries are set by law, so the government can't use money to influence their decisions.
Okay, so they've really tried to make sure that the courts are impartial?
They have. It's all about ensuring that the rule of law is upheld.
It's good to know they've taken those steps.
It's a cornerstone of a fair and just system.
You know, as we're talking, I keep thinking back to this concept of Gesamtstaat. You know, this idea that Austria presents a united front to the world, even though they have this internal division of power.
It is a bit of a paradox.
Like, we might have our disagreements at home, but when it comes to dealing with other countries, we speak with one voice.
Exactly. And this idea, it has implications for things like citizenship.
Okay, how so?
Austria has a single unified citizenship.
Okay.
It doesn't matter which Bundesland you live in, you're an Austrian citizen.
But I imagine people still have a strong sense of identity with their specific Bundesland, right? Like people in Tyrol, they probably feel a strong connection to their state.
Absolutely. The Constitution recognizes this connection. It
Yes.
does, like having this dual identity.
So you're an Austrian, but you're also a Tyrolean.
Precisely. It's another example of how Austria manages to blend national unity with regional diversity.
It's a really fascinating system. It
Yeah.
seems like they've put a lot of thought into making sure everyone feels represented.
They have. It's all about balance and inclusion.
All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about political parties.
Okay.
I feel like political parties sometimes get a bad rap,
They do.
but they are a key part of any democracy, right?
Absolutely. They represent different ideologies, different interests, and they help to organize political participation.
And the Austrian Constitution, it recognizes this, right?
It does. It guarantees the freedom to form political parties.
So people are free to come together and form parties that reflect their beliefs.
Exactly. And there's an interesting detail here. Political parties in Austria, they don't have to register as associations.
Really?
Yeah, their legal status comes directly from the law on political parties.
Interesting. So it's like the system is designed to make it easy for political parties to form and operate.
You could say that, but of course this freedom isn't absolute.
Right. There have to be some limits.
Exactly. There are limitations, especially when it comes to parties that want to undermine democracy or promote hatred or violence.
So no Nazi parties, for example.
That's right. The Constitution specifically prohibits parties that violate the principles of a free and democratic society.
It's good to know they have those safeguards in place.
It's all about protecting democracy and ensuring that it remains healthy and vibrant.
Okay, this is all really interesting, but what about direct democracy? You know, like when citizens have a direct say in decision-making, like through referendums.
Oh, yeah. Austria has several mechanisms for that.
Really?
Yeah. For example, there's something called a Volksbegehren, which is a popular initiative.
A Volksbegehren.
So if enough citizens sign a petition supporting a particular policy, it has to be considered by the parliament.
So it's a way for people to put something on the political agenda.
Exactly. It gives citizens a direct voice.
And then there's the Volksabstimmung, the referendum.
Right. That's when citizens get to vote directly on a specific issue.
And those referendums, are they binding on the government?
They can be. It depends on the specific situation.
So it's a powerful tool.
It is. But it's worth noting that they're not used all the time, you know?
They're not.
They're usually reserved for really big constitutional changes or really important issues.
Okay, so they're used strategically.
Exactly. And there's one more mechanism I should mention.
Okay, what is it?
It's called a Volksbefragung, which is basically a plebiscite.
A plebiscite. Okay. I've always been a bit confused about the difference between a referendum and a plebiscite.
Yeah, it can be a little tricky. Basically, a plebiscite is like a non-binding referendum.
Oh, so it's more like a way for the government to get a sense of what the people think?
Exactly. It's like taking the temperature of public opinion.
It's interesting to see how Austria has all of these different ways for citizens to participate in democracy.
It is. They've tried to create a system that's both representative and responsive to the people's will.
It's a really impressive system. Okay, so we've talked about the federal structure, the parliamentary system, fundamental rights, the EU, and even direct democracy.
Right. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. It's clear that this system, it's built on this idea of balance, you know, balance of power, balance between different interests.
You're absolutely right. It's all about making sure no one entity becomes too powerful and that everyone has a voice.
It's like a well-oiled machine with all these different parts working together.
It is. But there's one more crucial part that we need to talk about.
Okay, what's that?
The Austrian Constitutional Court. This court plays a really important role in making sure the entire system works as it should.
So they're like the guardians of the Constitution.
Exactly. They make sure everyone plays by the rules. We'll dive into their powers and influence in part 3 of our deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, so we're back and ready to meet the guardians of the Austrian Constitution, the Constitutional Court.
You got it.
From what we've learned so far, Austria seems to be all about this, like delicate balance.
It is.
A balance between the federal government and the states, between their sovereignty and being a member of the EU, even between individual rights and what society needs.
Right, it's a very intricate system.
So does the Constitutional Court, does it play a role in maintaining all that balance too?
It does, big time.
Okay, tell me how.
They're like the referees, right? Making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Okay.
And that no one, not even the parliament, can overstep their constitutional boundaries.
So, if the parliament, let's say they pass a law, and that law clashes with the Constitution, can the Constitutional Court actually step in and say, nope, you can't do that?
They can, and they do.
Really?
They have the power to strike down laws that they deem unconstitutional.
Wow, that's a lot of power.
It is, but it's essential for protecting the basic principles of democracy, the rule of law, individual rights, all of that.
It just seems like there's so much trust placed in this court.
There is.
To give them that power, I mean, to overrule the decisions of the elected parliament.
I know, it's a big deal.
It is.
But it shows how seriously Austria takes its constitution.
So the Constitution is like the ultimate authority.
You could say that.
And the court, they're the ones who make sure everyone respects that authority.
Exactly. They protect it, interpret it, adapt it to new situations.
It's like they're the caretakers, making sure it stays relevant.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how Austria's federal system can lead to, well, sometimes conflicts between the federal government and the states.
Right, those different levels of government.
So does the Constitutional Court get involved in those disputes too?
They do, all the time.
Okay, and how does that work?
They basically decide which level of government has the right to act in a particular area. Their decisions are binding on everyone, the feds, the states, everyone.
It's like having a neutral judge.
Right.
To prevent these power struggles.
Exactly. They keep things running smoothly.
And they also protect fundamental rights.
You do. That's a huge part of their role.
Those Grundrechte they were talking about.
Yeah, those are really important in the Austrian system.
They are.
And if a citizen feels that their fundamental rights have been violated, they can actually take their complaint directly to the Constitutional Court.
So they have a direct line to this powerful court.
They do, and the court can invalidate laws or government actions that they think violate fundamental rights.
So it's another check on power.
It is. It's about making sure that everyone is treated fairly and that the government doesn't overstep its bounds.
So who are these judges who sit on this court? I mean, how are they chosen?
It's a very specific process laid out in the Constitution.
Okay.
It involves input from both politicians and legal experts.
So it's not just one group making all the decisions.
No, it's a collaborative effort.
How many judges are there?
14.
14, okay.
And they're appointed for life.
For life.
Well, until they reach retirement age, but it's a long time.
Wow, that's a big commitment.
It is, but it helps to guarantee their independence, you know?
So they're not swayed by political pressure.
Exactly. They can make decisions based on the law, what they think is right.
But even with all that power, they can't just do whatever they want.
Oh, you're right. They do have some limits on their authority.
Okay, I'm curious. What are those limits?
Well, for one thing, they can only rule on cases that are brought to them.
Oh, so they can't just decide to review something on their own.
Nope. Someone has to file a complaint first.
Okay, so they're reactive in that sense.
You could say that.
And what about appeals? Like, if you disagree with their ruling, can you appeal it?
When it comes to constitutional matters, their decisions are final.
Final. Wow.
There's no higher court in Austria.
So they really are the ultimate authority on the Constitution.
They are.
It's been incredible to learn about this whole system. You know, these checks and balances, the role of the Constitutional Court, how they protect people's rights. It's really impressive.
It is a remarkable system.
And it makes you realize that democracy is something that you have to actively protect and work at.
It does. It's not something you can just take for granted.
It requires vigilance, you know, a commitment to those core principles of fairness and freedom.
Absolutely. And as the world changes with technology, globalization, all of that, Austria's system will have to adapt.
Right, to face those new challenges.
But it's a system that has a strong foundation, and I think it's well equipped to evolve and meet those challenges head on.
It's been fascinating to explore all of this with you.
Thanks for having me.
I think we've just scratched the surface of Austrian constitutional law, but hopefully this deep dive has given everyone a good overview of how this intricate system works.
I hope so.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep.